invite Professor Rangarajan to come up on stage. Thank you very much. On behalf of Ahmedabad University, I welcome you all to this session with Dr. Rangarajan, Distinguished University Professor here at Ahmedabad University, and of course the former RBI Governor. I thank you all for coming to this event, and I especially thank the people from outside of our university, from all the local colleges, and from as far as Baroda. I also thank a number of recruiters, corporate sector people who have, and faculty from all the colleges who have come in to listen to Dr. Rangarajan. I am sure that you have all come here because you are concerned about the economic issues and situation of that we face in the country and globally. I am also sure that you have come in to listen to Dr. Rangarajan. We at Ahmedabad University are also concerned with economic issues, and so we have launched a number of programs for students to study economics. We have started, the idea is to get young minds to think about the economic problems facing us, both nationally and globally, and to think in terms of possible solutions to these problems. Our programs are designed in such a way that they are very practice-oriented programs. The Masters in Arts in Economics is taught jointly by the School of Arts and Science and the Amrit Modi School of Management. Similarly, we have a program in Bachelor's in Economics. We also encourage our students in our undergraduate programs, BBA and BCom, and our MBA students to take a specialization in economics and finance. What this does then to the students, along with doing a lot of interdisciplinary projects, is that it makes our courses much more practical and practice oriented. We have a lot of activities with regard to honing your skills, with regard to data analysis, information, and so on. But also interdisciplinary learning is one of our key methods of teaching in our programs. So I again welcome you all and request all the kids sitting here. There are chairs in front. Please come down. There are a few chairs here in front. And the volunteers, please just look for gaps and get people to sit down. Okay. All right. So I invite Professor Pankaj Chandra, the Vice Chancellor of our university, Ahmedabad University, to introduce Ahmedabad University to you, particularly for all the people who have come out from outside of our university, and also talk about our programs. I also invite him to then invite Dr. Rangarajan to hold the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iman. Okay, well, Professor Rangarajan, Professor Kalro, the founder, provost of Ahmedabad University, many of my faculty colleagues here, and students and faculty from other institutions. Let me add to what Professor Unni has just talked to you about the program and tell you a little bit about Ahmedabad University and what is it that we are trying to do here. And then we'll get on very quickly to hearing Professor Rangarajan speak. So Ahmedabad University was set up in 2009 by Ahmedabad Education Society, and it is we're building it up as a liberal education-driven research university. Now, what does that really mean? And how does that distinguish itself from many other universities that we have both in the city, in the state, and in the country? There are three characteristics that we are working towards to define Ahmedabad University very uniquely. One is, as I don't know if you noticed, our Dean of School of Arts and Sciences, Professor Patrick French, speak to you on one of the videos, is interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is in your ability to be able to see an issue from multiple perspectives and bring multiple disciplines to bear to solve a problem. We often have talked about that today's environment, there's very little that one discipline can do to really solve a problem. You need both information and knowledge from many different worlds to come together. The second is in creating flexibility in learning, and that's embodied in an ability to take courses across the university. Most universities where at least I have studied, if you are an engineering student, there's rarely that you can get to take a course in humanities or social sciences. If in social sciences, there's no way you could possibly kind of fill in your curiosity and learning from biology, for instance. Ahmedabad University is very unique in that sense, whereby all courses are open to everybody. And starting 2019, we launch our new undergraduate program, which are built on these principles: interdisciplinarity, flexibility, and at the same point of time, an ability to undertake research and self-learning at the undergraduate level itself. At postgraduate level, both at master's and PhD, all are driven towards looking at new areas of employment. Most new jobs are not occurring in old disciplines where we were traditionally looking for jobs. They're looking at boundaries of disciplines. So if you have a computer science background and at the same time literature, you can get into digital humanities and get into a very new world of publishing, for instance. If you are doing biology and you do a minor or some courses in computer science, you can get into bioinformatics and work with companies using that kind of knowledge very differently. Those are areas where new jobs are occurring. And at Ahmedabad University, we're developing many interesting master's programs which are research driven, that where knowledge comes together from various disciplines, and they then lead you to both employment at one end and at the same time for those who are interested into doctoral programs, both here or anywhere else. That's the kind of world that we are building here. And as part of that is what Professor Unni talked to you about, and that is our programs in economics. I understand many of you are either students of economics or aspiring to become students there. We're very fortunate that under the guidance of Dr. Rangarajan, we are able to develop master's and undergrad and subsequently PhD program that, in economics. In 2019, we will launch our very unusual and very rigorous program aimed at industry requirements and getting to bring young people to get the skills that are needed for that program. And our master's program today embodies that kind of spirit. That's the world that we live in. We are a 21st century institution located in the heart of a city, and nothing could be more exciting than to understand the context of learning around you before you come into the university to learn. So we are not a gated community in which education happens, but education happens in the context of the issues as they are occurring in the society. That's what we are, and I invite you to, as you go out from here, to pick up some of the brochures if you're interested in the masters and programs across different areas which are located on tables outside. Please pick one up, look up at our websites, and if there are things that you would like to hear and clarify, there are people outside or on the website, names and email IDs are given. Please feel free to contact. Let me now I have the proud privilege of coming to the activity of the afternoon, which is to introduce Dr. C Rangarajan to you. He does not need any introduction, but it is customary, and more importantly, you might not know certain things about his life that I think are definitely worth listening to. So Dr. Rangarajan is an Indian economist, former member of Parliament, 19th Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and the former chairman of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He received his PhD in economics from University of Pennsylvania, and here I'm going to bask a little bit in your glory, Professor Rangarajan. I share two institutions with him. My alma mater, University of Pennsylvania, where I did my PhD, is the same as his, but I went 24 years later. And the second is he taught at Ahmedabad as a faculty, and I've again followed you. And that's where the comparison stops. and I'm fortunate to be in that same environment, and I'm very happy that he's here today. His textbook on macroeconomics is very widely used in business schools, and he received an honorary fellow of IIM Ahmedabad in 1997. Dr. Rangarajan also served as the governor of Andhra Pradesh, and from 1997 to 2003. And after demitting that office, he took charge as the chairman of the 12th Finance Commission. While being the governor of Andhra Pradesh, he also at times officiated as governors of Odisha and Tamil Nadu. So you can well imagine the kind of world that he has traversed, and the world of economic wealth, general wisdom, and an understanding of the society and government that Dr. Rangarajan brings to us today. We're also, as I said earlier, very, very fortunate that he's agreed to be the distinguished university professor, which is the highest professorship at the university, with us here at Ahmedabad University, and would like to invite you to come and talk to us.
Professor Pankaj Chandra, Professor Dimo Rooney, and friends. It gives me great pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I wanted to talk to you this afternoon on some aspects of the Indian economy and also some of the major concerns that we need to attend to as we begin the new year of 2019. Before that, I thought I should also add a few more words about the new program in MA Economics that we have launched. Economics today applies to a multitude of situations. Traditionally, the subdisciplines under economics used to be monetary theory, public finance, and international trade. Today, the tools of economic analysis are applied to solve many problems, from environment to problems in municipal or local government and so on. And therefore, our objective in launching the program is to bring about or to make students who are capable of applying economic tools to the multitudes of problems that may arise. In effect, we are looking for students to become not only experts in theory or understanding of that, but also capable of applying the analytical tools to the various problems. So the emphasis is on both general economics and applied economics. Today, the tools of economic analysis are not just limited to what you might call mathematical tools, but also statistical tools. You need to have a good understanding of the various statistical tools and econometric tools that are available to find solutions to problems. I'm not saying economics is mathematics. Economics is different. But mathematical tools help to a great extent to have a deeper understanding of the economic issues and economic analysis. It is from that angle we look at mathematics. We are not looking at mathematics per se. We are looking at mathematics as as a model which can help economists to solve problems. So we are launching this program, or we have launched this program, MA Economics, with a view to turn out students who can go out not only to teach as it happens normally, to research institutions in economics where you are needed, but also in other areas like journalism and so on and so forth. Today, the number of economic dailies that are coming up are increasing day by day. And they also need people who have a good understanding of economics and economic analysis. Therefore, the broad objective of this program is to give you a good understanding of the principles of economic analysis, equip you with the various tools that are required in order to apply the economic knowledge, and also to give you not only an understanding in economics but also in related areas. Therefore, those of you who want to pursue further in the field of economics may want to look at our program, and I would strongly recommend, even though it may look like that I am supporting my own cause, but I would strongly recommend that you take a look at it and perhaps come here later, and I would like to meet you later here in this auditorium. Let me talk today about some aspects of economics of the Indian economy, and also, as I said, some of the major concerns that we need to confront as we move ahead. People talk about liberalization. 1991 is an important landmark in the post-independence economic history of the country. The country at that time, that is in 1991, faced an acute economic crisis triggered by a severe balance of payments problem. But the crisis was converted into an opportunity to bring about fundamental changes in India's economic policy. In the 1950s and 60s, the dominant view in economic literature was that the state had an important role to play and that it must act to correct what came to be described as market failure. Market failure is the ineffectiveness of markets to perform their function. This market failure was particularly perceived in the area of allocation of resources over time, that is investment, because of the myopic character of the participants. At the same time, the literature also emphasized the advantages that flow by launching a set of consistent and coordinated projects. It is this line of thinking that led to nationwide economic planning, not only in India, but in the rest of the world. But what does development experience over the last 5 decades or 6 decades show? The regulatory mechanism with centralized planning, which was what was considered to be the appropriate model at that time, also led to misallocation of resources and the diversion of resources into what is called rent-seeking activities because of the regulations themselves. Therefore, the lesson that we learn from the development experience of the last 5, 6 decades is that there is the possibility of both market failure and government failure. And the question really is not whether or not there should be government intervention, but the question is the nature and the quality of government intervention. It is on this principle the new economic policy is founded. There is a common thread running through the various measures that have been introduced since 1992. And that is to improve the productivity and efficiency of the system by injecting a greater element of competition. Ultimately, competition leads to efficiency, and efficiency leads to better growth. Therefore, that is the basic principle underlying it. Therefore, this principle of injecting a greater element of competition means dismantling the restrictions both on growth and settlement. So this is applied to various areas. For example, the changes in industrial policy, which included dismantling the various controls and regulations, were intended to improve the domestic competitiveness of Indian firms. On the other hand, the changes in foreign trade policy, the foreign exchange policy, which meant reducing the tariffs and removing the quantitative controls, were intended to improve the competitiveness of Indian firms in relation to the rest of the world. No doubt, the private sector is being given a larger space in which to operate. Many of the areas exclusively reserved for the public sector have now been thrown open to the private sector. Classic examples are aviation, power, and so on. But there is nothing in the new economic policy which takes away the role of the state. In an economy, the state or government can play three roles. One, as a provider of marketable goods and services. Two, as a regulator. Third, as a provider of public goods and services. The role of the government as a provider of marketable goods and services is coming down. We are no longer setting up industries or by the state in the area where markets can perform and marketable goods can be delivered. As the role of the state as a provider of marketable goods and services goes down, its role as a regulator of the economy becomes more important. And at the same time, the state is also required to play a bigger role in terms of the provision of public goods such as primary education and primary health. Therefore, the role of the state has not diminished. The role of the state has been redefined. As it has been somewhat cryptically remarked, more market does not mean less government, but different government. The role of the government becomes much more important as a regulator, becomes much more important as a provider of public goods and services. I will not go into the definition of public goods and services, you normally understand it, but there is a tighter economic definition for public goods and services. That's as we see, the liberalization program led to a break with the past in three important areas. One, in dismantling the complex regime of controls and regulations. Second, in redefining the role of the state. And third, and very importantly, abandon the inward looking trade policy and get integrated with the rest of the world. I broadly said about what the policy means. Its application into the various areas really mean different things. Liberalization was introduced first in foreign trade, foreign exchange market, public finance, and so on. So the areas in which initially the liberalization policy did was to introduce a principle of competitiveness in the various areas. Of course, industrial licensing is extremely important. In fact, I keep telling many people, people ask, what was the role of Narasimha Rao in the whole field of nationalization and the liberalization? In fact, many people forget the fact that when Narasimha Rao was Prime Minister of the country, industrial policy was with him as a portfolio. The whole industry was with him. And the same day when Manmohan Singh presented the budget, in the morning the industrial policy was released, in which all the controls and regulations were removed. So somehow or other, people tend to forget this. Narasimha Rao, being the person that he was, will not project himself. And he had also this great responsibility of taking all the people with him, because the old guard, as they call it in the Congress, had its own beliefs. Therefore, even though he was making a fundamental change, he was saying, I am continuing the policies of Nehru. I do not know what he meant, but that is what it was. So, so that's by the way. Now, therefore, the question that we want to ask is, all right, these were introduced. How do you assess the economic performance of a country? What are the criteria that you would use in order to be able to understand how well this economy has done? I would say there are three criteria which one must use to assess the economic performance. First, the rate and pattern of growth of the economy. That is important because we need to know how much we have been producing before and how much we are producing now. I will emphasize once again why rate of growth is important. Rate of growth of the economy is critically important. Second, to what extent the growth process has been consistent with what we might call the stability conditions. Growth without stability conditions cannot last for a long time. Therefore, growth to be sustained has to satisfy certain stability conditions. I will come back a little later to what I call the stability conditions. And the third is the distributional implications of growth. Who benefited from growth? And if the way in which the policies are structured that result in an unequal distribution of the benefits of growth, it is also not sustainable. It is also not, shall we say, morally acceptable. Therefore, we also need to understand the distributional implications of growth. I will go through these things very quickly because there is a lot to be said, but I will summarize many of the things without going into the details. The Indian economy between 1950 and 1980 grew at an average annual rate of growth of 3.5%. And population at that time was growing at 2.2%. With the result, the per capita income was growing at 1.3%. Certainly, this is a disappointing performance. But one can say it is not disappointing if you look at India's growth in the first half of the 20th century. Between 1900 and 1950, India's economy did not grow. The rate of growth is zero between 1900 and 1950. Since population was growing at that time, the per capita income actually fell between 1900 and 1950. So in that sense, it's a break. But nevertheless, it has fallen short of our expectations. We always wanted to grow at least at 5% per annum. If you look at all the 5-year plans, you will see that the rate of growth, expected rate of growth, is 5%. So there is some obsession with 5. I said, in the fifth 5-year plan, try to achieve a rate of growth of 5.5%. So there is, at that particular time, growing at 5% was regarded as the major objective. But we fell short of it, 3.5%, and there were years in which the economy did not grow also. Post 1991, what happened? Between 1992-93 and 2011-12, because I'm taking a consistent series. There have been problems post 2011-12. The rate of growth of the economy has been 6.9%. The Indian economy between 2005-6 and 2007-8 grew, according to the old data, at an average annual rate of growth of 9.4%. It is the first time the Indian economy had grown at a rate exceeding 9% for 3 successive years. You add 2 more years, even then the rate of growth of the economy over the 5 years comes to 8%. Because 1 year in between was the year in which there was a worldwide economic crisis, 2008-9, and therefore our economy also was affected. But taking the 5-year period, we had a rate of growth of 8%. But according to the new data, that with the new base of 2011-12, about which you might have heard, that 9.4% rate of growth has been lowered to 7.9%. If time permits, I will come back to say what is wrong, not what is wrong, what is the reason for the difference between the 2 rates of growth. So, certainly, if you look at the performance of the Indian economy, in terms of rate of growth, the post-liberalization period is certainly had a much higher rate of growth before the liberalization period. What are the stability conditions? There are 3 stability conditions about which I want to talk. A good example is what happened to India between 1980 and 1991. The annual rate of growth of the Indian economy between 1980 and 1990, not excluding 1991, is 5.6%. And that was regarded at that time as the highest rate of growth the economy had achieved. But then it also ended up in the crisis of 1991. And it's extremely unlikely that if we had not made a change in terms of the policy, whether that rate of growth would have been sustained. Why? Why was the whole problem of 1991 was a problem arising as a result of excesses both in public finance and in the balance of payments. In 1990-91, India's current account deficit was close to 3% of the GDP, and more important than the fact that the current account deficit was 3%, it was not possible to finance that current account deficit. And when you have a high deficit, when you have a deficit, what it really means is that you have to borrow money in order to be able to pay for it. That is, if your imports are higher than your exports, then you have a deficit. Then how do you meet the deficit? If you have gold or if you have foreign exchange, you can give it and meet the deficit. Otherwise, you have to borrow. But there is nobody who is willing to lend to you. Then the crisis becomes much deeper. That was the crisis of 1991. So the fiscal deficit was also high. So what we really need is a situation in which if growth is to be sustained, certain stability conditions have to be met. One is, of course, what I said, the low current account deficit. The other is also a low fiscal deficit. And finally, reasonable price stability. Very quickly, I will say what have we done in all of these areas post-liberalization. In some sense, I have said elsewhere that the balance of payment situation post-liberalization is really one of the success stories of liberalization. We went ahead and knocked off all the barriers. We went ahead and modified the exchange rate system to launch a unified market exchange rate for the country. And despite all of these changes, this is the first time that in 10 years we have not gone to IMF. In 1971, we went to IMF for funding. 1981, we went to IMF for funding. In 1991, we went to IMF for funding. So 10-year each that the economy had been seen. But since that, the flow of funds, the current account deficit itself has been lower. I think it has been calculating for the entire period, more particularly in the recent period, it has been about 1.3, 1.4% of GDP. And the capital flows have come in such a large quantity, it has filled the current account deficit and added to our reserves. Therefore, at one point, we had $420 billion of reserves, but after the recent hiccup, $30 billion have been used up. So we are now slightly below $400 billion. I will come back to this problem once again. The fiscal deficit has been managed, but not that well. I think it's the FRBM Act, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, originally said that the central government should not exceed a fiscal deficit more than 3% of GDP. If you look at the last 12, 13 years, you will see there has been only 1 year in which India's fiscal deficit was below 3% of the GDP. That was 2007-8. In 2008-9, people may not believe that the fiscal deficit of the government of India was 6% of GDP, and followed by that. And that is what really resulted in the inflation of 2009-10 to the rest of the period. Therefore, there is abundant reason why we should maintain fiscal deficit. People ask, where from did this number 3% come? Maastricht Treaty has 3%. Have we simply followed that? No, it is not correct. I have explained in many places and I have written on that. The reason for getting 3% GDP is that if you look at the country, you can divide it into three constituents. One is the households, the other is the corporate sector, and the third is the government, the business sector and the government. The only surplus constituent is the households. Households is the only one which saves, that is, spends less than what it earns. All others, both government and the corporate sector, borrows from the household sector. Household sector's savings as a percentage of GDP has been around 22%. Half of it is invested by the households themselves, basically housing. Therefore, it leaves us with only about 10% or something like that. In some years, it has been even lower. So, what the 3% came about was, if we give 3% of the GDP to central government, another 3% to state governments. So 6% of the GDP is taken away by the government, and that is only the balance 3 to 4% which is available for the business sector. So that is how this 3% of the GDP came about. It is not some number thrown out of picked from anywhere. So as I said, in recent times we have been trying to get to that number because the finance ministers are always apologetic, saying that it is above 3%. So it was 3.5%. Then they said it will come down to 3.3%. But I'm not sure that at the end of this year, it will end up at 3.3%. It will be something higher, and some reason will be given. Now, I am not particularly bothered if the budget deficit is increased by a few decimal points or something like that. I mean, no one can be so sure about it. But a consistent increase in the fiscal deficit, about the about 3% of the GDP, is not desirable at all. As far as the price level is concerned, I will give you quickly two numbers. If you consider 4% of 4% inflation as the most desirable, there were only 6 years out of the 18 years where it was less than 4%. And there were 7 years in which the inflation rate was above 6%, and out of which in 3 years it was about 8%. So it's a kind of a mixed bag. All that I can say at this particular point is that what we really need to do is, if we need to have a sustained economic growth, you need to take a look at the stability conditions and move as close as possible to the stability conditions. If you deviate too far from the stability conditions, the rate of growth cannot be sustained, and it has been proven by our own history that the growth itself begins to fall, and inflation begins to take a big toll on the economy. And the third one is the distributional implications. The In some sense, people talk about social development as distinct from economic growth. Social development is the improvement in health indicators, education indicators, and so on and so forth. The question to ask is there a conflict between economic growth, defined in terms of improving the productivity of the economy and increasing the output, and social development indicated or marked by indicators like health and education? In a fundamental sense, there is no difference between the two, because ultimately economic growth is meant for the people and improving the quality of life of the people, and that improvement in the quality of life can come only with better education and better health. In fact, there is a synergistic effect between the two, because if the people are well educated and if they are more healthy, the output will also increase. But at the same time, if you spend everything on social development and you educate people, and when they come out, if there are not enough jobs, it causes even more distress than before. Therefore, there should be economic growth to be able to absorb the people whom you are trained or who have come out of the educational system. Therefore, there is a close relationship between the two. And certainly, you can see whatever growth that we have seen over this period has resulted in some substantial improvement in some of the social health indicators. Many people do not realize that life expectancy in this country in 1947 was 33 years, and today it is 62 to 63 years. Therefore, there are areas in which there has been significant change that has occurred in the health indicators, but nevertheless, we are concerned, because in the Human Development Index of the world of the recent period, out of the 188 countries, India is ranked 131. We are in the bottom one-third of the nations. And as Deleuze and Amartya Sen have pointed out in their book, The Uncertain Glory, that there are countries with similar per capita income as ours who have also done better on some of the health indicators. One thing that is very often pointed out is the infant mortality rate, which is 44 out of 1,000 in India, and it is 37 for Bangladesh, and 17 or 13 for Mexico. So it is possible to improve some of the social and health indicators independent of the level of income. and that depends upon the policy. How do you measure the inequality in the income in the country? There are statistical techniques through which we can measure, and that is what is called the estimation of what we call the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient for consumption, the Gini coefficient is 0 if it is all equal, and it is 1 if it is totally unequal. It is really a triangle. I mean, you triangle, and you have a circle below it, and the one end is 0 and the other end is 1. The Gini coefficient in India in 2011-12 was 0.35 as far as consumption expenditure is concerned. As far as income is concerned, it is 0.56, and as far as wealth is concerned, it is 0.74. I wish to say that I do not place much reliance on the income coefficient and the wealth coefficient. The consumption expenditure done through the National Sample Survey is more solid, well tested, and therefore I would go more by the consumption expenditure Gini coefficient. This does not show much change over the period of time. In 1955, in a very famous article, Simon Kuznets had argued that in the early stages of development, the Gini coefficient will actually rise. Therefore, the critical question to ask, which is what I have done in one of the books that I have recently written, is to ask about what are the considerations that you want to look at. One is Gini coefficient, yes. Essentially, it says bottom 10% of the people get how much of the total income. Top 10% of the people get how much of the income. If the Gini coefficient is high, it essentially means the top 10% of the people get a lot more than 10%, maybe 30% or 40% of the total income. See, it is also important to look at what we call the poverty ratio. You can all, I wish to say that the country can do better on improving the poverty ratio, but its Gini coefficient may yet be growing. Because the poverty ratio essentially means you have a particular normative level, and whether how much of the people fall below that normative level. Therefore, there can be improvement in the poverty ratio, but does not necessarily mean that the Gini coefficient has come down. And this particularly happens when there is a rapid rate of growth in the economy. I want to cite only one instance because this is a very complicated exercise. But let me say that between 1993 and 2011-12, India's growth rate provides very interesting insight. Between 1993 and 2004-5, 92-93 and 2004-5, India's per capita income grew by 4.3%. During this period, the poverty ratio fell from 45.3% to 37.2%. In 11 years, it fell by 8.1%, and therefore the average annual reduction is 0.74. Between 2004-5 and 2011-12, the per capita income growth rate was 6.7% as against 4.3, and the percentage of reduction in every year is 2.18 as against 0.74, because the poverty ratio fell to 21.8. Now, this poverty ratio, which I mentioned, is what was computed by the Tendulkar methodology. Subsequent to Tendulkar, there was a committee under my chairmanship, and I have a different estimate on this, but that estimate also shows this reduction during this particular period. Without going into the details, let me say, what it really means is the faster the rate of economic growth, the lower the reduction, the greater the reduction in the poverty ratio also. One country, for example, which focused purely on growth and reduced poverty is South Korea. By growing at the rate of 7% per annum for 3 decades, they eliminated poverty completely. So there is a relationship between growth and the poverty ratio. And I think the faster the rate at which we are growing, the greater the reduction in the poverty ratio. Let me say this. I do not, for this reason, say that we should not act on poverty or we should not act on what we need to do for vulnerable sections. I have elsewhere advocated what is we call the twofold path of letting the economy grow as fast as possible and addressing at the same time the needs and the vulnerabilities of certain sections of the society. Therefore, growth by itself will not do it. Growth supplemented by policy can lead to it. Therefore, there is dissatisfaction. Tendulkar estimated for 2011-12 21.8%, whereas 21 point, whereas I have estimated at 30%. That essentially means one third of the people are below the poverty line, and that is not something to write home about, and therefore we really need to enhance it. But at the same time, we should not forget the fact that the higher the rate of growth, it has been possible to reduce the reduction in poverty. I was about to miss, but let me also say one thing. Many people think that measuring the extent of poverty in the country by one parameter, like the consumption expenditure, is not the right approach. You need to have what they call multiple indicators. And against which you should measure whether the people fall below the poverty line or not. I have um, some concerns about multiple indicators. I, there is an aggregation problem in using the multiple indicators. But in the recent time, there has been a lot of talk about the rising billionaires in the country. In this din about the rising billionaires, one of the studies brought out by the Oxford University in collaboration with um, UNESCO has been overlooked. And I want to read this first paragraph on India in this report. This report covers 105 countries. The multiple indicator index is based on 10 indicators: health, child mortality, years of schooling, school attendance, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and assets. So they follow the multiple indicator approach. This report has specifically discussed the case of India. It is well worth quoting the opening para on India. India has made momentous progress in reducing multidimensional poverty between 2005-6 and 2015-16, climbing down to 27.5%. The global multidimensional poverty index was cut by half due to deeper progress among the poorest. Thus, within 10 years, the number of poor people in India fell by more than 271 million, a truly massive gain. This is indeed very high praise. In fact, they go on to show that the, the fall is even greater among the lower sections of the population. Let me say once again that I am, just because the Oxford study has shown things have not changed. I mean, we still have one third of the people below the poverty line we need to address, and we need to ensure that the growth rate is high. There are some other things that I wanted to talk about, but I will skip. But let me come to the problems that I feel we need to address immediately. In fact, the growth rate has fallen in the recent period. Uh, the growth rate in 2017-18 was 6.6%, which is low compared to the rate of 7 to 8% that we have been growing at, growing in the past. Therefore, increasing the rate of economic growth becomes critically important. I therefore think there are five important concerns that we need to look at. I was going to here talk a little bit about why the rate of growth differs from two sets of data, but I will skip it because that's an issue by itself. Let me say, in the final analysis, the rate of growth of the economy depends upon two factors. One is the investment ratio, that is the amount of investment that the society is making. And second, the productivity of growth. The famous Herron-Domar equation says G is equal to S over V. S is the savings rate, which is equal to investment rate in equilibrium, divided by V, incremental capital output ratio. Incremental capital output ratio is the inverse of productivity of capital. That is, incremental capital output ratio means the amount of capital you require to produce 1 unit of output. Therefore, the higher the incremental capital ratio, the lower the productivity of capital. So the rate of growth of the economy depends upon the productivity of capital and the ratio. This incremental capital output ratio is, is a difficult measure. It's a result of a combination of many things. Better health, better education, better skill, therefore better quality of labor, as well as better technology. All of that combine together to determine the incremental capital output ratio. I want to say that what has happened in the recent period is a decline in the investment ratio of the country from 35.8% in 2007-8 to 28.5. People ask about why the economy is not growing faster. We did this earlier. It is precisely because the investment ratio has fallen by a very substantial amount from 38.5% in 2007-8 to last year 28.5. This is a significant reduction. Therefore, if you want to go ahead and accelerate economic growth in the country, we need to look at two things: accelerate the investment ratio and retain the incremental capital output ratio at 4:1. That, I think, is a major concern. We can turn around and ask the question, what do we do to raise the investment ratio? The question really is, what is required in order to promote investment? Keynes talked of what is called animal spirits. The animal spirits have to be revived. The animal spirits can be revived not only by what happens in the economy or in the economics of the country, but also in the rest of the system. I believe a robust, um, a harmonious system, both politically and economically, is needed if the investment ratio is to pick up. There is, as said, no indication of the investment ratio picking up. Without the rise in the investment ratio, we cannot expect the economy to grow faster. You may ask the question how we are then even going at 7% per annum. I will come to it presently. The second is, of course, very quickly that all of us know that the growth in the economy is sustained by the growth in the financial system. The financial system is an integral part of the whole economy, which aids the real system, that is what we call the real economy, to grow. We all know about the problems that the banking system has been facing. It is the non-performing assets, that is that which are not, on which no income is coming, that which are not being repaid, has grown to 16.7% as of a recent period, that is March 2018. And there are many, one big problem that has arisen is, earlier on, we used to have development banks, IDBI, ICICI, were development banks which were providing funding for capital purposes. Now they have all gone. They have all become universal banks. Therefore, the banks today provide working capital as well as the funding for capital requirements. Therefore, when the banking system is under a stress, it is not only the provision of working capital that has suffered, but also the availability of funds for long-term capital, long-term investment. So we need to address this issue and as quickly as possible do it. One thing is that the government have agreed for infusing greater capital into the system. They have done something, but I think they need to move even faster and do it. The other question is that people ask that employment is not growing. I must admit that we do not have good data on employment. We have a decennial or a quinquennial survey, but that survey itself, uh, the survey as such has no problems. But the data that come from that survey is of a type which does not throw, in my opinion, a clear light on the employment situation. But the point is, why is there is enough data to show in the organized sector for which employment is available, it is coming down. But employment, as far as India is concerned, is even more in the unorganized sector. So, um, one of the reasons for the decline in the job growth is growth in an economy can occur for because of two things. One, because of new investment, and therefore growth is happening. And the other is a better utilization of existing capacity. Because if there had been overinvestment, many people say this, in the period from 2008-9 to the later period, that every project looked rosy, and therefore people went in. Therefore, there was a very high level of investment, and therefore, if the that's why the saying in the banking system also, bad loans are sown in good times. Because at that time everything looks rosy and every project is acceptable, and then when growth slows down, then the very projects which were viable at one point in time do not become viable. Anyway, to come back to the point, that when growth occurs because of a better utilization of capacity, the job addition is much less. Whereas when growth occurs as a consequence of new investment, then the job additions are much more. Second, if you look at the period from 2005 to 2005 6 to 2011 12, the two major sectors which have absorbed employment are the IT sector and the financial sector. The two sectors are now under structural changes. IT is progressing, but not the same way it was progressing during that particular period. And these are very visible for educated people who go into the labor market. The immense opportunities that were available in the IT sector and in the financial sector were very lucrative. Now, unfortunately, these two sectors, which contributed to much employment in that period, has not been happening. And that is why I say once again, as I mentioned earlier, the important thing to do is to bring about a higher investment ratio, and that is the only answer to growth. I will skip one, which I don't want to spend time. I think I've already taken more time. One is on the external sector. As I mentioned earlier, the external sector has done well, but then there are vulnerabilities, as we saw in the recent downfall in the value of the rupee. That is because when your uh, crude prices rose, your current account deficit rose, and at the same time, people were withdrawing money from your country. The two together combined to create a situation in which the rupee came under pressure. But once the crude oil prices started falling and the confidence returned, we have come back to the old level. I think it's a matter of 2 months or 1.5 months during which this happened. But basically, I think we need to address both curtailing imports. We need to find alternatives to crude and so on. And many people do not realize today, one third of the imports of our country is crude oil. Nearly one third of this is electronic goods. And that is where our problem is going to come out. Every mobile that you use has an import content. And the more mobiles we use, the more electronic equipment we use, that is going to be another thing. And therefore, we are focusing much more on software, and I think we need to address the question of hardware also. And finally, the agrarian distress. I think people are all talking about it. Why is this agrarian distress? I mean, I think there are two or three things that we need to note. very quickly. One is people have been talking about fall in prices. The fall in prices, unfortunately, is also a success story because the production has increased, and that is why the prices have fallen. 3, 4 years ago, people were all complaining about the rise in the prices of pulses. It has hit the ceiling. Now, today, the prices of pulses have fallen. And that is because there has been a substantial increase in the production of pulses. Therefore, what is the answer? When you can't blame the farmer, you have to find a solution. I had written a paper in which it argued that the solution to this does not lie in paying the difference between the market price and the minimum support price. That will not solve the problem. There is problem identification and so on and so forth. What I said was that the fall in the price is because of an increase in production over an average level or the previous level. What is really needed is for the government to come to the market and procure the excess so that the market will automatically adjust the prices to the level that is desired. So you need to have sufficient capacity, financial and other capacity in terms of go down and to procure them. But also, we are all students of economics. If the demand for the product is inelastic, then even a small increase in output will lead to a substantial fall in prices. You look at the demand curve, almost like a straight line. If the supply increases from one level to another level, the prices will fall very steeply. So perhaps what we have in India is an inelastic demand for many of the products, and therefore the best way to address the problem is to go into the market and procure the little excess that might have made. It's like what is called the razor's edge, as they call it. So suddenly it falls once it happens to that point. But more importantly, we have to increase the productivity. And some people keep on asking the MSP must be increased. It can be done, but it must be understood also that an increase in MSP also leads to increase in food prices. And that will affect the rest of the society. So one must be fully understand that it is not without cost, it has a cost. The other thing is, even if you increase the productivity of income, what will happen? The average size of the land holding in our country is 1 hectare. 1 hectare is 1.4 acres. And the marginal farmers have only a land holding of 0.38 to 1 acre. Whatever you do to increase the productivity of the income that is going to come out of this is not going to support it. We need to have consolidation of holdings. We need to address that particular problem. Productivity must be increased. And we know that even in looking at India, in some parts of the country on the same commodity, the output is much higher, the productivity is higher. We need to do that. But at the same time, we must address the land holding problem without which we cannot find a solution. Let me conclude. I mean, in many ways, the coming decade will be crucial for the country. To give the dimension of the problem, India's per capita income is today $1,800. If only we grow at 9% per annum, by 2025, India's per capita income will increase from $1,800 to $4,000. And only then India will be classified or shifted from low middle income country to high middle income country. If we have to become a high income country, which means $4,500 per capita, it will take 22 years from now. That is the rate of growth at which we need to do if we have to achieve that. Therefore, we need to understand this. Growth is critically important in being able to achieve a respectable level of living. In many ways, development has many dimensions. It must be inclusive, it must lead to reduction in poverty, it must be environment friendly. All of these things need to be built into the growth process. But at the same time, we cannot underestimate the importance of growth itself. As I said, we need to follow a twofold path of letting the economy to grow fast and addressing the issues of the vulnerable sections. But growth will be the final answer to all our social economic problems. Reforms are not ends in themselves. Even growth is not an end in itself. Ultimately, growth triggered by reforms must accrue to all sections of society. Equity and efficiency should not be posed as opposing considerations. They must weave to produce an acceptable pattern of development. Therein lies, if I may say so, economic statesmanship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rangarajan. I think we are all a little breathless with the span and the scope, both in terms of time and in terms of issues that Dr. Rangarajan has covered today. I mean, it's more than a whole course in economics that I got in one session from Professor Rangarajan. He is a very strong believer in the long-term benefits of growth, as we all heard it 3-4 times. And he has clearly identified the issues that are of concern to us and the solution in terms of there's no other way than to raise our investment. And of course, how does that happen is of course a question. And this whole story of ICOR, it's really very interesting. I've heard him before in my classes talk about it, in the way he places it as a crucial way of looking at how growth would occur. And of course, being a labor economist, always the most interesting thing that I find is when he talks about employment and his, because that's where most of the Maravari is happening today on prime time television and everywhere else. So he has this very simple way of looking at it. Again, bringing it down to investment. That if it is new investment, your chances of growth of employment is much higher. But since we already have overcapitalization of our industry, and of course all the issues with the banking sector, the chances of that raising employment is much less. So thank you very much, Dr. Rangarajan, for this really, really wonderful and insightful talk. So now we'd like to open the house for questions. Who'd like to ask the first question? Yes, please, Anil Bhai.
Second thing is that agrarian distress, if the crop fails, why on earth we cannot efficiently disperse the insurance? What is the problem in this crop insurance? So, do you think these two are very important things to fix?
Consolidation of land holdings have not been given, in my view, any importance by the government in recent years. Um, when we were students of economics and when we are doing rural economics, there is a lot of talk about what is called fragmentation and subdivision of land. And people talked about various measures that can be done. But the point really is that you either you have to have a strong operating land market so that people may sell the land and go out. Or otherwise, if they still want to stay in the farming, it is always possible, like the self-help groups, for some of them, 7 or 8 of them, coming together and pooling the land and therefore getting the strength to some extent of the size. The Avadi resolution, you remember, of the Congress talked about the cooperative farming. Now that has not succeeded. I mean, I think once you merge into, the ownership goes away, then there is no interest in it at all. What is really needed is to have some understanding of what is the minimum size that may be required in an area and encourage people to come together voluntarily and to set it up. Therefore, the self-help group model is perhaps what following. Your second question is on the crop insurance. The problem has always been to uh, it's very much an administrative problem. I mean, it's not a theoretical problem. It's once it has been declared that this is the loss that an area has suffered, then the insurance companies must be able to dispense it very quickly. There is ignorance both on the part of the farmer and the part of the insurance company. I think the farmer doesn't know where to go and how much where to get. And the insurance companies, as you know, always take advantage of the situation. I think it's more an administrative problem.
Okay, let's next one. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Raj Virani. I am a student of LD Arts College of Political Science, and I just had two questions. You first, sir, talked about stability that is required for stability. If we don't follow the stability conditions, we will have to suffer in turn. So, wouldn't that reduce the taking of risk for higher economic growth? And my second question is, you said that the state should now function as a regulator, but it has been seen in some of the Western countries, even which have liberalization, that they are now thinking to, re-entering the state in terms of railways. In UK, they are now thinking that the participation of state should increase in all of the services and even market goods and products. And would creation of a bad bank or asset management company lead to a reduction in the NPA problems in our country, as it has been suggested by Deputy Governor Acharya? Thank you, sir.
So, what is your first question?
My first question was that you said that we need to
Stability conditions. Okay,
stability. Yes.
right.
Wouldn't that reduce risk?
No, I think the whole question is we may be taking a bigger risk if you do not follow the stability conditions. How would one describe the 1980 experience? Yes, the growth was going good, and finally you end up with the big crisis of 91, 92, and the rate of growth fell to 1.1%. Therefore, what I have been saying is, if you have to have a sustained high growth, you need to look at the stability conditions. And the stability conditions also should be such that they are not too tight in order to strangle the system. I mean, if I say that the fiscal deficit should be zero, which is used to be the theorem many years ago, what is called balanced budget, no deficit. Now that is impossible to do. Therefore, where you put the level is extremely important. But ignoring the stability conditions totally would really end up in a situation in which your growth will not be sustained. The second is on the banking system.
No, the state as regulator.
Regulator.
The regulator. Now, yes, you know, it is not very clear where the experience is leading to. Yes, you said in some countries they are thinking in terms of going back to nationalization. But the biggest country in the world, the richest country in the world, also elected Trump. So what is the lesson do you draw? I think these are questions that are debated. The reaction to a situation is to the either extremes. When people were dissatisfied with the establishment, they either go to this extreme or to that extreme. So the American society went to one extreme. Therefore, I don't think that there is any strong movement in the European Union for going back to those days. I don't think so. After all, what do you think of the dismantling of the entire Soviet system and all the East European countries? Yes, there is always a certain dissatisfaction that comes. Now you ask the same question in India. How many people will feel that liberalization is just done as good? Some people who think that employment is not growing fast enough can even come up with the idea that no, liberalization has not done this much. But you look at over the period, in my opinion, it has done. So these reactions come.
Thank you, sir. Myself, Atman Shah, and I teach economics at St. Xavier's College. I have two questions. You mentioned market failure and role of state. So we see that state also fails in delivering its role, like state is not spending enough on education and health. So if state fails, is there any alternative to achieve socially equitable outcome? And if yes, then how can we incorporate that in economic theory and practice? And my second question is, what is your view on doubling farmers' income by 2022? Thank you.
Well, on the first question of what is that? I mean, the first question was the state's
States fail. If states fail, then what is the new?
oh, that the education and all that you said. No, look, the whole point is a democratic system is supposed to really do this because it will compel the political parties to conform to certain things. Now, why is it suddenly that you hear nowadays about more basic income to be given, quotas should be added, and so on? All this is the pressure of the society on the people who are in power. Therefore, what we really need to do is that as the economy is growing, we really need to put pressure on them to be able to spend enough on health and education. Therefore, what is the optimum level? There is no way of deciding. I mean, there is no model that will tell you exactly you spend so much. But what is also happening in recent times is what you saw in today's or yesterday's paper that money is spent on education, but then they're saying that the first class student is not able to read what the second class student in the second class should be doing. Now there's an efficiency question also coming. Therefore, how do you bring about the efficiency? Is that done only by government running it, or is there an alternative system? Milton Friedman talked of the educational coupons. Therefore, he said that you give the coupons to them, and they will choose that school for which is actually delivering, and that school will collect more coupons, and therefore it will be able to get more money. Therefore, you really need to think in terms of whether it is the direct action by the government in the field of education or through some other incentive mechanism it should be able to do. I'm sorry.
Can we have this person? And people in the back benches, can you also kind of wake up to a please.
I'm Sri Krishna. My question is like my understanding is in the 90s and the early 2000s we got lucky because of technology boom. Not that the government intentionally invested, it just accidentally happened, and we benefited out of the 90s and 2000 because of the great growth in technology, and that was also high, probably cause of higher growth. Now today, uh, we need to identify high growth areas and education, invest in education. So where do we stand there? In the sense, is the government done anything? Because I understand you have the economics and other aspects of investment. So if you have a high growth area, that will naturally bring in investment. So where do we see that?
No, I don't think the broad fundamentals influencing investment are changed between, let us say, 2005 to 2011 or 2010-11 and in the recent period. I think the fundamental factors which influence investment remain the same. But the question really is what is the response to the demand that is available in the system. Um, to some extent, I accept the argument that has been put forward, which I also mentioned. Namely, we overinvested during the period, and therefore there will be some time before fresh investment begin to happen. But it has been taking a much longer time. I mean, I think if 2010-11 is the cutoff point that we use, or 11-12, then it is almost 6 years, 7 years. I think the investment environment has not been created. Perhaps you said, but as I mentioned, that investment is the result of not only economic factors but also political and social factors. And I think the way in which the investor has to put in his money and take the risk depends upon the total environment that has been created in the economy. Therefore, technology is changing, and technology may be changing in the direction in which employment may be decreasing. I mean, that's a fear. What is happening to the IT sector is quite clear that the IT sector is not going to be able to take more and more people. In fact, if artificial intelligence becomes the rule of the day, then even in IT industry, the need for people will come down. Therefore, technology has an impact. But I personally believe that the total environment has been vitiated to some extent. But the fundamental factors influencing demand for investment continue to remain the same.
So, out there in the back. You can ask questions out of syllabus also. I'm sure Professor Rangarajan will be able to answer them.
Myself, Mitesh Chotai from Ahmedabad School of Management. So my question, I have two questions. The first question is that, so yeah, as you said that for the growth of the country, investment is absolutely necessary, and the government is trying to do that from last 5 years. They have significantly tried their best. But the thing is, major companies like Apple or let's say Walmart, let's say the example of Flipkart. So Flipkart has invested $16 million in Walmart has invested $16 million in Flipkart, but recently the policy of the government changed and their inventory of $1 billion is at stake. In a similar way, that if we see Apple, the Apple has invested some amount in Bangalore for the production of their products, but still Apple is not really open like this. Like the CEO of the Apple has admitted that the government is not yet fully open for the investment, that kind of investment to happen. Secondly, the question is, so you have served in RBI for more than a decade, and there has always been a tussle between the government and the RBI. But recently, in last 5 years, if you see, sir, the government has openly, like, the tussle between the government and the RBI has become public, and Mr. Urjit Patel resigned recently. So, what is your take that if the government, like in 2019, if the NDA government once again comes to the power, so what is your take that how will the RBI and the government truffle affect the economy of the country?
You asked two different questions.
Yes.
One was about the flow of foreign direct investment and the areas into which it is going. You see, there is one problem about this foreign direct investment. If Flipkart was bought or whatever it is really the change of hands. It is not fresh investment, really. I mean, the definition of investment in is important because what the in foreign direct investment, what is the difference between portfolio investment and direct investment? In both, you are buying the shares. Therefore, there is a cutoff that is used, I think 10% or something like that. If you buy more than 10% of the shares of a particular company, it is foreign direct investment. If you buy anything less than 10%, it is portfolio investment. Because the idea is that you are not interested in the management of that company, but you are only interested in getting the dividend from that company. So, in some sense, buying of the Flipkart does not add to the total investment in the country. I think even though the word foreign direct investment gives you the idea, it is not always so. So that is one thing you have to remember. In some sense, this government has also expanded the area in which foreign direct investment can come. Obviously, defense-related industries were earlier on closed. Now they are opened to a great extent, and therefore foreign direct investment can come in. Earlier on, the argument was that there is secrecy and so on and so forth. But that is a very facile argument because you buy the whole equipment, whether it is a fighter plane or the bomber or whatever it is, and then you say that if somebody wants to manufacture, then you will get to know what we are using. I think this is a very false argument. Therefore, I would say that this government also has done in expanding the scope of the foreign direct investments. Now, you are asking a question about the relationship between the Reserve Bank and the government. Um, it happens in the regime of every governor that there are always differences with the government. In the terms of what I talked today, government is interested in growth. RBI is interested in stability conditions. So that is where the clash comes. So one says, this is what is needed for growth, let us push more and more. The argument is always lower the interest. The industrialists have never seen a day when interest can be raised. They will always come and argue interest rates should be lowered. Whereas RBI, in charge of the stability condition, will not allow that. Therefore, this discussion, this differences between the government and the RBI have always existed. There is another thing. RBI is not only a monetary authority, but also a regulator of banking. That is where problems are created. If you are a regulator of monetary authority, I think you can be given a lot more independence and autonomy. Actually, now I think the RBI has the fullest autonomy as far as monetary policy is concerned. It is a monetary policy committee which decides the policy rate, and the finance minister doesn't know what the policy rate is going to be until you and I know along with you. So that is a big change in terms of the autonomy of monetary policy. But when it comes to the regulation of the banking system, what banks should be doing at a given point in time, there is always a difference of opinion that comes. The question is, how do you manage the difference? It is not as if that there are no differences or there cannot be differences. There will be differences. The best thing that you can do is to manage. Now, one can say who is the ultimate authority. That is very difficult to decide. I mean, if it's a strong governor, he can keep on focusing on this. Sir Montagu Norman, who was governor of the Bank of England for 25 years, called the Reserve Bank of India as a nagging wife. So what you can do is nag and nag and nag. Ultimately, if the government is too strong, then you have to give up. But you should not give up nagging. That nagging you should do. But basically, I would say that in the case of monetary policy, I would say that the Reserve Bank of India should not give up. I mean, I think they are the final authority. In the case of banking regulation and all that, there has to be a mutual understanding. So it's because there are different families. In each family, if you look at it, in one, the husband is the final authority, in another, wife is a final authority. In fact, one of my colleagues told me this equality between man and woman is not possible in every family. We can have only a statistical average in which it happens. So what is really important is that you manage the differences in such a way that it does not explode. But ultimately, if it cannot be managed, then the government leaves. This is what happens. There was the resignation of Venerable Rama Rao in the early period in the 1950s, when there was a difference of opinion. And Krishnamacharya being the kind of person he is, I think he's one of the most arrogant men I have ever seen. And that's what happened. So he had to quit. And there have been other cases, which I have quoted in one of my articles. So the point really is there will be differences of opinion and it has to be managed. But if it cannot be managed, the governor has to quit. But it happens in a very rare set of occasions. After all, you have created an authority which you call Reserve Bank, give it a certain autonomy, then you should not interfere with it. But then if the government has a viewpoint, the governor has also to listen to it. So finally, the answer is you have to manage. Sometimes it has been possible to manage if you have a reasonable governor and a reasonable finance minister. But if you have a reasonable governor and an unreasonable finance minister, then the problem comes in.
Okay. Hello, sir. I'm Mercy and I study at the Center for Heritage Management. My question is that in the context of the twofold path,
I don't know what I.
if you're audible,
Give another mic. I think that's
There's some problem with the mic.
check. Okay. Hello, sir. I'm Percy, and I study at the Center for Heritage Management. My question to you is that in the twofold path which you spoke about, could you elaborate more on how policy plays an important role in growth? Because if I mean, when all the directions of economic growth are focused towards growth, but policy can really help in curbing where and where it affects it. How important or how can we feed into the policy to understanding the economic systems that that lie below it?
Right.
but how do others participate into this making of? Is that what you're asking? How
Yes.
to participate into the making of this policy?
Policy, yes.
How to get an input into it?
No, I think the whole process of democracy is supposed to achieve that. I mean, I think uh, the if you were to ask the question whether launching the liberalization program had a political backing or was it approved by the society before being launched, it is very difficult to answer. I think if the policy change was made, as I mentioned earlier, Manasumara kept on saying it is a continuation of the earlier policies, but you keep on changing. I mean, the change like 1991 does not happen often. I mean, many people talk about Big Bang changes. Those Big Bang changes happen only once in a while. Today, I do not expect a Big Bang changes. I mean, because we have moved on several directions to make changes there. So, policy making, very often it is called bottom up kind of a situation where the policies emanate from the bottom. It is regarded as in local governments, it is a more effective way instead of being top down. So neither it should be top down or it cannot always be bottom up. You have to work out a compromise between bottom up and top down. And the only way in which the policy initiatives can be, I mean, the people's opinions can be expressed is through the press and also through the representatives of the people. And the whole thing is that all parties come out with a manifesto. That is what they say that they will do in the next 5 years. Now, when people vote for it, do they look at the manifesto? Is the voting for X or Y means that they abide or they endorse the particular manifesto? I think we need to reach that level of sophistication.
Hello, sir. My name is Kuldeep Ahuja, and I am teaching in RC College of Commerce. My question is a bit historical questions. There were four people when we did LPG in 1991. Mr. Rao as a PM, Dr. Singh and two other people, how much credit you will give to these two people in terms of percentage for doing LPG?
No, I think it's very difficult to give percentages, but I would really say that both of them played a key role. One, the supporting role, because when Manmohan Singh, at least when he became prime minister, he had 10 years of, he had 5 years of finance minister experience. Then he was the leader of the opposition and so on. But when he became finance minister, he came right from the bureaucracy in a way, and therefore he needed political um, support, and that support was given by Narasimha Rao. You cannot move forward that forward without that kind of political support. Therefore, you have to view the two together. But what is happening now is that many people have forgotten Narasimha Rao. I think that's not correct. I mean, even Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he speaks, he gives due credit to Narasimha Rao. It's in fact, reacting to the question that the accidental prime minister, he said, I was not an accidental prime minister, I was an accidental finance minister. So that happened out of the blue. One morning, get the telephone and say, you come and become finance minister. So, but the fact of the matter is that Narasimha Rao played a very key role, provided the political support. So, if you look at it that way, you can give 50-50. So,
I'm Manjunath, working in the Central Library. Looking at the conflict between the Finance Ministry and RBI Governor, the bone of contention is transferring part of reserve funds to the Finance Ministry. Out of 9.6 lakh crores, the ministry is asking for about 3.4 to 3.76 lakhs crore. So, what would be the compromising formula in case you were in the situation? How would you have dealt with this problem?
well, the compromise formula was found by constituting a committee. I mean, that is the best way to answer that problem because there is no unique way of answering it. I have a view, somebody else will have a different view. But the point really is that that was not the breaking point. I think that the breaking point was something else. And the whole question is that I should not be misunderstood. I mean, there are differences. The question is managing how to manage the differences. But if the governor finds it very difficult, at the end of it, he quits. So, but whether the Ujit Patel sent in his resignation saying for personal reasons, he didn't even say any particular cite any particular reason for quitting. The whole question is today it is reserves. Tomorrow it will be something else. You don't think that in the direct action between in the direct coordination between RBI and the government, there are many issues that come up. And for example, RBI may say that you infuse capital into the nationalized banks quickly. But the government may have a different view, saying that no, it is necessary to infuse it, but to put in the capital, but I will take time. Now, the question that very often arises is, if a private bank said, I will take time, the regulator will say immediately, you quit. But he cannot say that to the government. There are problems of that particular sort. But as I said, differences have to be managed.
RBI has already committed for Basel latest.
Huh?
RBI has already committed
To
to implement the Basel latest regulations. Will be able to do that with this kind of.
I think we'll take the
Resolution.
discussion outside. Yeah. I think we have just one more very crucial fellow at the back. Yeah, please. Who's got the mic? This is the last question.
Thank you for allowing this last question, perhaps. In fact, my question has been preempted by the gentleman who spoke from the first line. I was, and even as Rangarajan Saab touched upon the relationship in general between RBI and the government. And I wanted to be, I was curious on specifics of the PCA and the reserves. Reserves have, of course, been touched and answered by you. But I still think the PCA question coming in the backdrop of increasing NPAs, and I think 2 days back there was another news doing the rounds, which is about the increasing NPAs in the Mudra loan scheme also. So can we really say that the expectation of the government about relaxing the PCA is perhaps well founded?
So you are asking for an opinion? No. Now, I don't have all the details about the banks which were put under PCA and so on. But both sides, in fact, claim that they are not asking for relaxation of the norms. The question is, how do you apply those norms to a particular bank or something like that? Now, certainly, there was an issue about the capital adequacy. I have no inside knowledge. I have only read newspapers. The RBI insists on 9% of the risk-weighted assets, and the government says that 8% is what Basel Committee has said. Why do you want to have more than 8%? But the answer to that by the RBI is that 8% is the minimum, and we have to look at the total set of circumstances under which the norm should be prescribed by us, and therefore we think should be 9%. Now, these are matters on which a considerable amount of discussion between RBI and the government would have resolved. Then I don't particularly disagree with RBI in prescribing a higher norm of 9%. But but there must be other considerations which was to weigh with the Reserve Bank of India in raising it from 8% to 9%. The whole question is that the kind of give and take that is needed. I mean, I see there are some matters on which you cannot deviate, and you might think that it is absolutely necessary. Therefore, the question is that whether there was considerable discussion between the RBI and the government on this matter, or whether it is simply one saying this position and another taking the other position. That is why I think management of the differences is extremely important.
Thank you very much. May I request Professor Himani Bakshi to come in and propose a bit of thanks. Himani has been responsible for bringing a lot of you to our university, and thank you very much for coming.
Good evening. Good evening, all. It's my honor to propose a word of thanks for such an academic event and a session by Professor Rangarajan. Thank you, sir, for taking through the whole journey of Indian economic growth. And as Professor Jimal said, that it's a whole course. Thanks a lot for even bringing out those critical aspects of the growth, the stability conditions. I think it makes so much sense to contextualize the growth for a student who is just looking at the headlines of 7.4%, 7.6% growth that economy is trying to achieve or has achieved. I think the students would have been motivated a lot to now think about these issues, to discuss these issues, to then raise questions. The basic learning probably I also as a student that got is that ask questions. Is government failing? Is market failing? What are the three parameters for this particular aspect? So I think that's the biggest learning that we had of this session. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot for this active and enthusiastic participation of the students who have come across from various universities and colleges. I think it's so much joy to look at your faces with a lot of concerns. And you are the one who actually have hopes and concerns for India's economic growth. We're all very thrilled to see you all here. Thanks a lot for all the professionals from industries and academia to join us in our endeavor here to promote such economic and connecting economics with the society. Thanks a lot to all my staffs and faculty colleagues who actively joined us for this event. And thanks a lot for all the staff members who took care of the entire administration and the logistic support that has made this event successful. Uh, I wish that in future also, when such kind of an academic event takes place, we all join us together, be in touch with us. Wish you all the best and thanks a lot once again.